Throughout my life, I faced unfair treatment because of my favorite sister, but on my wedding day, I finally got my long-awaited justice. My sister, the golden child, always received preferential treatment from our parents, and she even tried to steal the spotlight by walking down the aisle at my wedding. But in the end, I had my moment of triumph. My parents' bias toward her was blatant. If she accused me of anything, they'd take her word and punish me without question. But when I accused her, even with solid evidence, they'd let her off lightly and still find a way to reprimand me. My birthday cakes were always her favorite flavor, despite my clear dislike for it, and my parents acted oblivious. They showered her with more gifts and took us to places she preferred, even when the occasion was meant to celebrate me. Growing up, my sister was spoiled and often used me as her emotional punching bag. In our early years, she mostly ignored me, but things escalated during our teenage years. She lost all her friends, whether they moved away or abandoned her for her cruel behavior. I never knew, as we were never close. My parents constantly bragged about her accomplishments while ignoring her flaws, yet they eagerly point out my shortcomings as fodder for teasing. I only realized she had no friends because we attended the same school, and I noticed her isolation. Meanwhile, I had a decent social circle, which she envied. This shifted her from occasionally targeting me to relentlessly trying to tear me down. She began accusing my friends and me of all sorts of things, and my parents restricted my socializing, claiming my friends were bad influences based on her word, or questioning why I couldn't just stay home and enjoy family time like her. My extended family saved me from total isolation. Most lived in our hometown, and I bonded well with my cousins despite our age gaps. At one family gathering, they invited me to an event. I don't recall what, and I sadly explained I wasn't allowed to go. When they asked why, my younger self candidly said it was because my sister had no friends, so I wasn't permitted to have any either. This revelation reached the adults, who confronted my parents fiercely. I was scolded for lying and grounded for a month, but afterward, my parents eased up slightly, making it worth the trouble. My sister, humiliated by the family knowing her social status, demanded to switch schools, and my parents promptly complied despite the higher cost of the farther away school. She made new friends there, but never reverted to ignoring me. Emboldened by her ability to manipulate me and angered by my exposing her to the family, she continued her campaign against me. Her friends would visit and taunt me, which my parents dismissed as harmless teasing. I never brought friends home because my parents were terrible hosts, and my sister would accuse them of stealing, with my parents always believing her. I grew close to my cousins, though, as my parents never mistreated family the way they did my friends. Then came my first boyfriend. I hesitated to bring him home, but my parents insisted. At one point, we were separated, and he found me to tell me my sister had been flirting with him, wearing revealing clothes, batting her eyelashes, and bad-mouthing me while praising herself. He was annoyed and came to warn me. Naturally, my sister spun a different tale to my parents, claiming he had flirted with her, but she nobly refused out of loyalty to me. Guess who they believed? My boyfriend wasn't flawless, but I trusted him instantly, not out of pure virtue, but because, as a resentful, moody teen fed up with unfair treatment, I despised my sister as much as she despised me. Let's address appearances, which I haven't mentioned since they weren't central. My parents, both overweight, showed love through food, giving more treats and snacks to my sister, who was also overweight. I, however, was always slim, partly because punishments often meant no treats for me. Weight doesn't define worth. Character does, but my sister's entitled, rude nature shone through even in her flirting, which was clumsy because she never had to earn anything. Our parents always gave her what she demanded. Even as a self-conscious teen, I didn't believe my boyfriend would cheat with her. Still, my parents banned me from seeing such a terrible boy. I tried continuing the relationship secretly, but it was too difficult and fizzled out. I later dated another boy, but my sister again accused him of flirting with her when he rejected her advances. My parents believe her, and when I pointed out the pattern, they insisted I had poor judgment and kept choosing bad partners. That relationship also fell apart under the strain. In high school, I gained a reputation for being fine with casual makeouts, but avoiding committed relationships. thankfully without my sister or parents finding out. Meanwhile, my sister brought home one boyfriend, whom my parents paraded proudly, constantly comparing him to me and urging me to find someone as good as him, until he vanished, and suddenly he was a deceitful jerk who fooled her. The unequal treatment persisted. She had more spending money and lenient curfews, while I was tightly restricted. If I complained, they'd claim it was because she was older, but when I reached the same age, I still didn't get the same freedom. They deny their earlier excuses or say I couldn't be trusted like her, citing her accusations against my friends and boyfriends as evidence of my poor choices. When my sister graduated high school, she was accepted into a mediocre college with no scholarship. Her grades were poor. I knew because they'd be was cause for celebration, while my good grades went unacknowledged as my parents saw no need to celebrate what I always achieved. They made a huge fuss over her college acceptance and promised to cover all her expenses. I was relieved she'd be leaving, though it didn't ease my life much. She returned every other weekend, and my things would mysteriously disappear from my room, or she'd stir up new trouble to keep me miserable. My curfews remained strict. As my own graduation approached, my mom informed me that since they were paying for my sister's college, they couldn't afford mine. They suggested I work right after high school and wait until my sister graduated to see if they could help me later. If I stayed home, I'd have to pay for my expenses, part of bills, and rent. I pointed out student loans, but my mom dismissed them, saying they'd decide if a college was worth my going into debt, as I had such poor judgment. I didn't question how they'd stop me from getting loans. Scholarships weren't discussed. They didn't know my grades anymore and never believed in my potential. I didn't flinch. I simply said, okay. My mom, clearly expecting a tantrum to justify denying me college funds, cried when I stayed calm. My dad later tried the same, but I remained unemotional. After a lifetime of their terrible parenting, I had no expectations they'd fund my education. I knew they'd find excuses to avoid it. I had been preparing for college for years. With limited social outlets, I poured my energy into studying, seeing college as my escape. I worked tirelessly and earned a full scholarship to a solid, if not prestigious, college program. Knowing my sister would try to sabotage me through my parents, I announced my achievement on social media simultaneously, even thanking them in the post to prevent them from forbidding it without explaining to the family. At first, they were slightly proud and bragged about it, but after my sister likely intervened, they questioned if I was sure about going, hinting that since she was struggling in college and was smarter with better judgment, I'd fare worse. I stood firm. They weren't pleased but couldn't stop me. College was my salvation. I found happiness. I stayed in touch with my parents and visited during holidays, but since they refused to contribute financially, I could skip visits citing costs. My sister dropped out of college, no fanfare, so I knew she didn't graduate and moved back home, paying no bills or rent, which my parents justified as different. She got a job at my mom's company, clearly through nepotism, and they presented it as a point of pride. Around this time, I met my husband. Some people say they'd stand up in tough situations. My husband actually does. I'm the type who stays quiet, acts like a doormat, then lies awake wishing I'd said something clever. I cry when I'm angry. My husband, though, responds instantly to slights, loves drama, and resolves it. If he doesn't clap back right away, you'd better worry. He doesn't forgive or forget. He's planning something. My husband, always eager for a chance at retribution, encouraged me to share our story here. He even considered posting on a more extreme revenge forum, but decided our actions didn't quite reach that level. People were surprised we ended up together, given my reserved nature shaped by my upbringing. But just because I couldn't act as boldly as he did, didn't mean I wasn't drawn to it. I admire how he stands up for himself and treats others kindly, unless they cross him. When we talk about marriage, we agreed the ceremony wasn't priority due to our tight budget. Instead, we wanted to splurge on a dream European honeymoon. Since his family was scattered, and mine was mostly in my hometown, we chose to hold the wedding there. We lived close enough to make weekend trips for planning, and our flexible work schedules allowed us to stay in my hometown when needed. We sent out engagement announcements and saved the date cards for a wedding a few months later. Naturally, my parents insisted on meeting my fiancée. I wanted to stand my ground and say no, but I struggled, softened by the distance that made me question if they were really so bad. When I told my husband I'd at least make sure they never met him alone, he looked like I'd ruined his favorite holiday. He was ready for this moment, practically giddy. He'd even bought a high-quality pocket recorder to capture everything. He was thrilled, already imagining how he'd rebuff my sister's inevitable flirting, throw her behavior back in her face, and share the recording with our extended family. So, off he went, alone and eager to face them. He returned practically buzzing with excitement. "Babe, you won't believe the terrible things they said," he exclaimed. "We can totally turn this around on them. There's so many ways to make them pay." Confused, I asked to hear the recording, but he wisely suggested I listen to his summary first, warning that the raw audio might overwhelm me. It's clear he didn't fully grasp the situation, but he went there anyway. Instead of charming my parents and sister, they cornered him. After some muttering about their disapproval of him, my choices, and so on, they declared they'd cover my wedding costs. But with a catch. They insisted my sister walk down the aisle at my wedding first, dressed as a bride. Their reasoning? It wasn't right for the younger sibling to marry before the older one. They argued it was only fair for my sister to have her moment in a wedding gown at my venue, complete with photos and even a cake afterward. Now, my husband will take over to share his perspective. Hey, it's the vengeful husband here. When my now wife is wronged, I'm all in for delivering swift, satisfying justice. Though she portrays me as sharp and clever, I confess my brain nearly fried when her family seriously proposed that nonsense, acting like it was some grand gesture. Even the Trojans would have hesitated to accept that horse again, right? Once I snapped out of my shock, I had a string of choice words ready to unleash, but a mischievous little voice in my head whispered to play along with their absurd plan. So I told them I needed time to gauge my then-fiancé's reaction and bolted before I could reveal my true intentions. Back to me, the wife. My husband came back and, with a sly grin, and a recording to back it up, recounted how my parents wanted my wedding to center on my sister. I was floored. Time had dulled the sting of their past mistreatment, and I never thought they'd stoop this low. Thankfully, my husband's focus on retaliation kept me from spiraling into a dark place. We had a blast brainstorming ways to outsmart them, from wildly over-the-top schemes to ones we thought we could pull off. We looped in his cooler-headed brother for advice. When we settled on a plan involving sending them to the wrong venue address, he warned us it'd be tough to execute, and that some of our other ideas could land us in legal trouble. So we opted for the simplest approach. Pretend to agree, then hire security to block her entry. But that's just the start of the real payback. My husband deserves the credit for the rest, though he insists I take the spotlight here. Everything he did, we planned together. He went back to my parents, claiming he'd thought it over, and, while he didn't think I'd be thrilled, he saw no harm in their idea and wanted to keep the family intact. He noted I avoid conflict, so surprising me with it might prevent a public outburst. But, he added, marriage is a big deal, so who knew how I'd react? He proposed a compromise. They helped fund the wedding, making me less likely to protest since we'd be in front of family, and I'd feel grateful for their support. My parents were stunned, and my grown sister practically danced with glee. They bought it. Crucially, my husband also said, using their own words against him, that I was suspicious and overbearing, always checking his phone to ensure he wasn't cheating. So, he stressed that nothing about this plan should ever be written down. Any talk of my sister walking down the aisle had to happen in person at their house. Thus began months of deception. They thought they were fooling me, but my husband and I were playing them. Rather than funding the wedding outright, my parents wanted control over everything, even things I cared about, like the music and color scheme. My husband would persuade them to back off to keep me in check, but since we weren't too attached to the ceremony details, we let them think they were calling the shots. Here's how we pulled it off. We'd review drink and menu options, choosing the cheapest or second cheapest. Then, my husband would secretly take my sister to sample them, lamenting that we didn't want to exploit my parents' generosity by picking the priciest options. Predictably, my sister would insist they pay for the top-tier choices. My parents would then assure me not to worry. They'd cover the premium options. We used the same trick with the photographer and flowers. My husband would show my sister our preferred bouquet, then sigh about how I wanted some tacky alternative. Sure enough, my parents would insist on our original choice and foot the bill. The wedding dress caused a slight hiccup. They wanted me in a dress I didn't like, not awful, but not my style and unflattering. We planned to agree but ignore it, but when my mom texted about it, creating a paper trail, I had to refuse outright and stand firm. My husband visited them, saying he'd try to sway me. My sister suggested sabotaging my preferred dress to force me into theirs. He played along, agreeing to the idea. To avoid any written evidence, we ensured communication stayed verbal by having me respond to my sister's text to my husband, reinforcing his claims that I was controlling and paranoid. They believed it and avoided texting anything incriminating. Some might not love their partner bad-mouthing in the family, but as someone who's always been a pushover, I found it hilarious to be painted as domineering and unpredictable. I even encourage him to lean into it. Guess I've got a quirky sense of humor. Oh, and my sister did try flirting with him, but he acted torn to sell his allegiance to their plan. My husband and I, who'd initially considered a simple courthouse wedding to save for our honeymoon, ended up at a lavish wedding we barely paid for. We called it compensation for the emotional toll my parents caused. My husband, yep, he just confirmed, enjoyed the scheming more than the wedding planning itself. I didn't think I'd ever see a guy so thrilled to spend a Saturday driving to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. The big day arrived. Their plan was to have my sister arrive in a wedding dress just as everyone was seated, timing it so I wouldn't see her and try to intervene. By the time I realized what was happening, it'd be too late. As for my dress, my husband took leftover fabric from my alterations in my parents' house, where my sister still lives, showing it as proof he'd ruined my dress. He said he had to rush back to calm my fury and would see them at the wedding. We kept our real security discreet at first. As guests of my parent arrived, they only saw a woman checking names off a list. Only after my parents settled and did we bring out the actual security, a burly guy we instructed to bar my sister's entry, promising a hefty tip for his silence. When the moment came, my parents got a text that my sister was minutes away. My dad signaled to start the ceremony, and my bridesmaids, prepped to follow his cue, did so without checking with me. As my dad waited at the entrance for me, the bridal music began. The doors opened, and I walked in. He was stunned, glancing behind me but unable to see the venue entrance, clueless about what happened to my sister. Then his phone rang, her caller ID. He mumbled about something coming up and left, leaving gasps and confusion in the room. A friend, not on the wedding party, but on the plan, loudly asked what happened. I tearfully said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me walking down the aisle, a line my husband and I agreed would make my dad look terrible if he bailed. The tears weren't entirely fake. I was genuinely hurt and fighting not to cry. My friend then shouted, asking what he meant by it not being me, ensuring everyone heard and whispered about it. She ran off, saying she'd check, as planned, to stir chaos with security and keep my dad from returning to halt the ceremony. My mom soon left too. My husband's dad, pre-warned he might need to step in, rushed to my side, his urgency making me smile. I walked down the aisle amid murmurs about the drama, with some guests leaving to investigate. At the altar, my husband comforted me, joking that my convincing sad face deserved an Oscar and promising to handle my parents for their stunt. The ceremony went smoothly. My parents didn't return. I noticed guests coming and going during the reception, but no one told me what was happening. Someone whispered to my husband, who stepped out, returning with a stormy expression, but whispering he had to hide before he broke character and grinned. It worked. Here's what friends, family, the security guy, and my husband later told me. My sister arrived in a wedding dress, but security blocked her, saying she must be at the wrong venue since there was already a bride. We tipped him generously as promised. My dad threatened to call the police, claiming the guard wasn't legit, but the guard offered to call him himself since he was hired by us and just doing his job. My dad realized it'd be too late and demanded my sister be let in. Our friend then arrived, yelling at my sister and stalling. My mom and others soon joined, and their plan was in shambles. All they could do was damage control, as guests were appalled they'd tried such a thing. People berated them, and they claimed it wasn't secret, blaming my husband. When he was called over, he feigned confusion, denying everything. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss, he later joked. He demanded proof of his involvement, knowing they had none. All their texts were about S.